make peace with your customers. They're not just cash registers. They have fears.
I'm Carolyn Pars, communicator, coach, and host of Just Power, a podcast about creating a clean energy future without leaving anyone behind. Join me as we explore the technologies, policies, and human stories that can make clean energy not just sustainable for our planet, but accessible for everyone. It's no secret that electric bills are rising. Over the next 4 to 5 years, we're looking up to a 50% increase in so many regions. Add that to food, add that to housing and healthcare costs, and the squeeze is on for so many people, especially low to middle income households. And utilities are telling us that it's going to take over $1.2 trillion, yes, that's a T, trillion dollars in new infrastructure costs by 2030. So the big question is, who will shoulder the costs of the energy transition? Will it be families already struggling to make ends meet, or the massive new players on the block like AI centers that are driving so much of this demand? These are burning questions that we're going to talk about today. I put them on the table, but before I introduce my guests, I just want to ask, if you haven't already, please subscribe to Just Power so that we can bring you more amazing guests and put these questions and more out there so we can really solve this problem. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And today, I am so pleased to welcome John Egan. He's a fellow communicator in the energy industry, and since 2009, he's been at it for a long time. He has helped utilities tell better stories to connect more deeply with their audiences. And we're going to need that more than ever in our energy transition. So welcome, John.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So you've been a communicator for a long time in the utility business specifically, John. So you've seen a lot. What, from your point of view, what we're seeing now, right, with what's in our energy transition, how does this compare to what you've seen in the past with energy burdens and rising costs?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's too much hyperbole, Carolyn, to say that right now it's about as bad as it's ever been. In fact, I'd actually have to go back to the nuclear power construction era of the 1970s to get a feeling for the kind of energy burden that we're talking about with large loads like data centers and artificial intelligence. I mean, it's typically utilities might be raising their rates, their prices. I try to use the word prices, more or less in sympathy with inflation, because, the cost of coal goes up, the cost of steel goes up, the cost of copper goes up, everything has to be paid for. Well, not only now are we seeing enormous requests for new power generation from these large loads, but it's coming in a time when there's a 50% tariff on aluminum and copper, which are basic materials for this industry. You can't build a transmission tower without steel. Most of that comes from overseas. You can't run a distribution line without copper. That comes from overseas as well. So, it's about as bad as it's ever been, at least in my 35 years. I can't remember the challenges being any higher.
Yeah. So, right, well, you're talking about not only are we in an energy transition and we have an aging grid, but now other layers of things that are happening, like the tariffs. Everything costs more there, and tax incentives on solar going bye-bye, right? So all of those
Absolutely, yeah.
things, right, are adding to the burden. So utilities have already spent 225 billion, you told me, in recent years, right? And they plan on spending another 1.2 trillion by 2030, which is really a blink of the eye when it comes to utilities, right? Because they plan so far ahead. How are those investments showing up on household bills today? And how much harder might it be for certain families, right?
Sure.
What we're talking low
Uh,
income.
Absolutely. I think certainly for the last 5 years that we talked about the 225 billion, that's money out the door already.
Yeah.
That's spent
Okay.
to build power plants, to build distribution lines, to upgrade software platforms, and so on and so on. I mean, that is and recover from disasters, right? I mean, hurricanes and wildfires and everything else. I
Right.
mean, you've got to, when the system burns down, you have to rebuild it. So
Hmm.
that is money out the door that we're still in the early stages of having utilities recover. I think ultimately over the next 3 to 4 years to recover that 225 billion, looks like at least a 10% baseline increase. It could vary from place to place. I mean, the cost of doing business in Arizona or Indiana is different from Pittsburgh and Chicago. But I think
Right.
we're looking at 10% as a minimum and could be quite a bit higher. In fact, in our state, in Colorado, Xcel Energy, the dominant provider in the state, the dominant electric utility provider, is looking at a lot of large loads, data centers, AI, and so on. And they had a preliminary filing with the Utility Commission, which the commission wisely pushed back on, where they said, where they proposed to basically increase the rates by 50% over by 2030 or 2035. I can't remember the
Yeah.
exact date, but basically falling all on residential and commercial customers. None of this was going to be paid for by large loads.
Oh, wow.
And that's just I mean, they probably put that out
Yeah.
there as a, well, let's see if we can get this past the commission kind of approach, because I can't believe anyone in their regulatory affairs office thought that this would fly. But the commission shot it down, and so they're back to square one in
Okay.
that situation. I will tell you, it's funny. I don't often find myself invoking the governor of Indiana, but over the weekend, the governor of Indiana said, "We can't take it," speaking specifically about electric rates and electric
Uh-huh.
plans to build, mostly around these new data centers. Now, the critical thing to think about going forward, and that's why I sent you two data sets, the one that's for money out the door, okay, and then the other one is prospective. And between 2025 and 2030, that's the 1.2 trillion. Now, not all of that is going to get built. And in fact, there's a little bit of a shell game going on here with the AI industry,
Yeah.
because there are two dominant inputs to running an AI or data center or AI, right? And that's the cost of land, where you have to build stuff, and the cost of electricity. There's virtually no staff. So low cost areas where land costs less and the electric prices are low are going to get a ton of interest. And that's why, Indiana and probably Iowa and other areas are getting deluged with these proposals. Not all of them are going to get built. But one of the
Yeah.
things you do notice is that there's not a lot of plans to build AI centers in San Francisco or Hawaii, where it's, extraordinarily expensive, both the
Yeah.
electricity and the land.
Yeah, that
So,
makes me,
so
yeah,
yeah.
knowing that they're rural lands, often they could also be tribal lands. And I hear
Mhm,
that there's a big one happening right now in Texas, Abilene, and
mhm,
I believe it's the one. Okay, 1.2 gigawatts is happening
mhm.
there. That may expand to 10 gigawatts. I know, it's crazy. Um, and 5,000, the apparently that town has a population of 5,000 people, and that's how many extra people, 5,000, that it takes to build this, right?
Mhm.
Monster of a building. But
Yeah.
then only 400 will be running it, like you said, after it's all built, and then they go. It feels like
Bye
that
bye.
kind of like a, you know, gold rush kind of
Right.
idea. And so we have to
Yeah.
protect our communities. We have to protect our states, right? And we have to figure out a way to do this, which you said that states like Virginia and Ohio are creating new classifications,
Mhm.
right, for
Mhm.
large loads, right?
Right.
How significant is that shift, and could it become a national trend?
Well, I think it's very significant, and I hope it becomes a national trend. The reason Virginia is in the conversation is that they are like the world's largest data center hub.
Yeah, I
Okay, they are at the end of a lot of different connection points, and so they are in some ways a laboratory right now. And I'm hoping that what they're doing, they in Virginia as well as Ohio, which also recently shot down a plan that the technology companies proposed, where they would bear very little of the cost and everything else would get borne by the other customers. I hope that does get shot down and that becomes a model. Now, what you and the way it becomes a model is that every state utility commission belongs to a trade association called the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, NARUC. That's
right.
kind of a mouthful. But they meet 2 or 3 times a year in person. They have subcommittees on electricity.
Oh,
I'm
that's
sure
good.
they have a subcommittee on affordability. If they don't, they should. And the point is that the regulators from Virginia talk to the regulators in Indiana, Connecticut, Kentucky, Florida, and so on. And so that's the way the idea diffuses through the critical regulatory community.
Hmm.
And I'm hoping that there's some fair apportionment of costs. I mean, people who use the service should pay a proportional cost, but the company that causes a surge in electric demand or causes a utility to go out and build a new power plant just to serve that uh, business, they ought to bear most of that cost. Because again, if you think about it from an activity-based costing perspective, if they didn't show up with this proposal, the utility would not incur any costs. So think
Right.
about what they have today without their proposal, and then think about the proposal and, apportion costs fairly. I mean, we're
Yeah.
we're going to benefit. We're going to benefit from AI. We are benefiting from AI, but that doesn't mean we should pay all the costs.
Yeah, I think has to be figured out, right?
Mhm.
And state by state, everyone's looking at each other, right?
Mhm.
So here, from a business or economic development standpoint, how do utilities balance like charging the data center, the fair
Mhm.
share, whatever that
Mhm.
is, without driving those businesses away to another state where they get a better deal,
Right.
which may happen. So,
Well, one of the ways, there's an old saying that some loads are just too good to run after, right? And like if you're a town of 300 people and Exxon shows up and wanting to build a huge refinery that's going to require the town to build 5 new power plants, well, that's probably a load that we're not going to run after. It just doesn't make sense. And I've
yeah.
heard examples of that sort of thing. So part of it could involve the utility effectively saying to the large load, well, we want you to include power generation and battery energy storage if you're going to use renewables on your side of the fence so that we can provide backup power if something happens to your equipment. But I think to the extent that we can wall off these loads from the general rate base, that would be better than just having everyone pay for it equally or some portion. You're just going to have a lot of litigation over what's fair and sort of what's reasonable and all of that. And regulators struggle with that every day, but they've got 100 years of experience, and they know that if Exxon builds a refinery next door to little mom and pop shop,
Hmm.
mom and pop shops should not be paying a disproportionate amount for that service. So I think we are in flux, as you say. We're in the early days, and a good thing to remember is a lot of these data centers are not going to get built. I love a piece from Amory Lovins, who's an advocate of renewable energy, as you know, and energy efficiency. who said that, in the current herd mentality of let's build everything, let's build more power plants, more generation, more transmission. In that environment, utilities risk what he called a 12-figure overbuild. And I had to pull out my calculator to see how
12.
many
Oh my God.
zeros. What? Yeah, that's hundreds of billions of dollars of unnecessary generation. And utility commissions have a very effective way of protecting their customers. It's called prudency hearings.
Yeah.
And so if a utility builds something, I mean, they typically have to get the utility commission's approval to construct it, but that's not a blank check. After they finish building it, they have to come back to the regulators and say, here's why we should increase our prices because this was prudently constructed, it was necessary and reasonable, and all of that sort of thing. And just starting around the 1970s, no coincidence, with nuclear power, when you saw massive cost overruns, that's when regulators started getting very active with prudency reviews. And so
We might be seeing that again, right?
I
With
think
the
so. I
activity
think
around.
that's a very good case to be made.
Yeah.
Understanding that first, however many large loads are being talked about, not all of them will be built first. And then second, regulators do have a weapon or a tool, not a weapon, it's a tool to protect customers. And a third element of the regulatory system is there are consumer councils. There are state agencies that are licensed and mandated and funded to act to protect the interests of small and medium customers, right?
Yeah.
ExxonMobil has plenty of lobbyists and lawyers, right? Meta doesn't need any protection at the utility commission. It's the little guys. So,
Yeah.
I think again we're in early days, but I think there are tools, there are opportunities, and we can talk more about those too.
Okay. Yeah, I want to get back to the communities. We talked about big business and how they're figuring that out, and they will. And there might be a lot of regulatory pushback, community pushback along the way, which actually creates delays and expenses. And it makes a great case for energy equity, in my view, right? If you do it right from the beginning, you can save billions. So, talking about our communities and the families and the households that are, and you're a communicator. What should utilities be talking about with their communities right now? Because I'm telling you right now, a lot of people do not realize the connections between what we're building and how it's going to impact them, except for these case studies that if they're geeking out on and they might read, or they're living in that town and experiencing
Right,
it. So
right.
what should we
Yeah,
be doing?
and often these big facilities are kind of nameless, faceless, big boxes built 20 miles east of nowhere, right? I mean,
Right.
you're not going to see one in downtown Denver, right? Well, there's a lot of things that communities could do, and this is really the time for communities and utilities to increase their level of reaching out to the other and trying to find a way that is equitable to have this new construction and new technology. I'm aware. So I work mostly with public power utilities, municipal utilities. They're owned by the customers they serve. And even with that kind of ownership, which is to say, they're not thinking about shareholders in New York because they don't have shareholders. They don't have stock. They're thinking about what's good for the community. Even among the public power utilities, there's only about 10% of them that have what I call a customer ambassador program. Okay. So this is an opportunity for utilities to really look inward and think more about their stakeholders and realize that, that their health depends on the health of their communities. And that certainly when we talk about social license to operate and stakeholder capitalism, I think there's a lot to be said for trying to get representatives from the community or certain groups within the community at the table, at the decision-making table, because they're going to bear the burden of it. And certainly in the greater Denver area, there's a great recognition of this, because there's a big refinery that puts out a lot of pollution, sitting in the middle of a disadvantaged community. It's called Commerce City. And I mean, I think the refinery was there first, and then everyone moved in to work at the refinery. But the point is that the refinery regularly emits all sorts of nasty gases, all violates all sorts of federal permitting limits, and eventually groups are created to advocate for the community, and they advocate at the regulatory agencies. So I think now would be the time, if you represent an LMI community, to look around and start to see who are our allies. You know, who are our allies, maybe with the Small Business Chamber of Commerce, maybe with the Latino Foundation, maybe with the Black American Foundation, you know, various organizations that have aligned interests, and then go to your utility. Now that's going to be, this is not uncommon in Europe, you know, where you have representatives of workers' councils or unions at the table, at the board of directors tables. They're required to be there. It's not the case here, but even in the case of municipal utilities, who again exist to serve their communities, only about 10% have this customer ambassador program. And I think those 10%, maybe it's more now, but that number might be a year or two old. But the customer ambassadors is an existing construct that can be used to try to bring the community's concerns to the utility.
I love this idea of customer working groups. You called it customer ambassadors. And I've seen some of that. We had LA 100, the LA municipality, which is the largest in the United States, on, and they brought in all along the way, it was kind of a poster child. They worked with NREL of really integrating the customer, the community groups. There are over 200 of them in this 100% renewable energy project, right? And I would love to see more of that, right? We have in this energy transition that we're having right now, way more than 10% that you just said. So I just want to ask you about that. What would be required, do you think, internally for, let's even say, for investor-owned utilities, culturally and structurally, to really take that on and integrate this into their business model? And why would they do that?
Yeah. Well, and first, just to comment on LA, certainly one of the most diverse cities in the country. And I'm delighted to hear that the utility there has really decided to partner with the customers. I think what's needed is really I guess I'd call it a change of heart, or maybe a change of mind among utility leadership, that understands that we all do better when we work together.
Right.
I'm mindful of many utilities who have by working with their stakeholders, their external customers, they've actually found new, less effective ways to serve, or more energy efficiency opportunities than they thought they existed, because they asked some external experts. So it's not that the only smart people work for utilities. I mean, the NRDC has a lot of smart people. EDF has a lot of smart people. And for advocacy groups, look around. You know, you bump into each other at the Utility Commission when you're filing for intervenor status, right? So whether it's the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce or the Small Business Association, you all know who you are. And I think what's needed is a sense of, on behalf of those organizations, to say, well, we're going to do better when we work together, rather than you wage this war and I'll wage this war, and all these sort of things. So
I think lawyers lawyer up during this time. I see it on both sides, right? They don't even talk to each other because it's been so contentious. So it's really a different way to do business. And I really believe that
It
there's a
really is.
business model here, a economic benefit to working together, which is what you're just
There
saying,
is.
right?
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
so looking
And
10 years out, John, like could
Mhm.
energy equity, which is what we're talking about, could it become not just like the right thing to do or the moral thing to do, but really hard, like a business risk mitigator that would affect
Mhm.
investor confidence, regulatory approvals, long-term
Absolutely.
viability? There's a lot of pluses here.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And the point is that the bond rating agencies in New York, and that's typically
Right.
Standard and Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch, they rate risk. And that includes regulatory risk, some of which is qualitative and some of which is quantitative. Like how well are they insulated from potential increases in the price of commodity? Or are they too highly leveraged to gas? Well, there's no reason that bond agencies, excuse me, bond rating agencies cannot include this type of environment in their qualitative risk assessment. And in fact, I'll
Love.
share a story from way back in the time machine. When I worked as a utility spokesperson in Arizona, I had a front row seat to the very contentious relationship that the neighboring utility, Arizona Public Service, had with its regulator. And not coincidentally, this is when they were trying to get the cost of their nuclear plant included in rates, in prices. And the Arizona Commission had a very strong pushback. They had two individuals who were very focused on customer equity and really asking the hard questions. And so after a while, Arizona Public Service and its holding company found that their bond ratings were getting reduced.
Oh,
And when a reporter went to Moody's or S&P, I can't remember who it was, and said, well, there's APS, which has this risk profile, and there's a completely parallel risk profile in another state. So why is APS getting punished? And the regulator said it's the Marcia Weeks factor. And the Marcia Weeks was the name of one of the commissioners. And so the point is that, yes, they have a very effective way to convey to utilities, and not only investor owned utilities, but also community owned utilities, that they are facing a intolerable risk, or they're not balancing their risks or mitigating their risks. And clearly the threat of a customer uprising, if you would call it that, is a risk. It's a very serious risk. Don't forget, utilities are regulated monopolies. They are given an obligation to serve a specific geographic area and given a guaranteed amount of profit. Now, that amount of profit is not set in stone. So it could be that utility commissions say, or city councils for public power utilities, they could say, you know what, the interest rate on a relevant T bond, let's say a 10-year T bond, is 5%. You're asking for a 12% return on equity. How about we lower that to about 6%? And everyone would flip out at the utilities because that's like, whoa, that's like hundreds of millions of dollars that we're not going to get back. And the answer is, make peace with your customers. They're not just cash registers. They have feet.
payers, right? So
For
we should
100 years
change
they
some
were
of the
ratepayers. But
language.
understand, I mean, the public affairs department at any quality utility has got to be sending memos to the executive suite saying, oh my God, this is a problem.
Mm.
These proposals to build all these data centers and advanced manufacturing and AI, this is causing communities to get nuts. And at the extreme, there is a possibility if a utility pays no mind, just goes along its merry way, traditionally the way it's been for 100 years, there is an opportunity, and the city of Boulder tried this, to municipalize. to basically go to the voters and go to the regulatory commission and say, we want to run our own utility. We think we can do better than the company that's serving us right now. And you better believe Xcel Energy suddenly went into overdrive to protect its service territory because
Grown out fight, right?
it was a long drawn out thing. Yeah,
So,
it was.
yeah,
So, I mean, that's a worst case. I'm not saying that there ought to be uprisings and municipalizations all over the place. I am saying, though, the investor owned utility that does not play its cards well has some risk down the road. And
yeah.
that can,
So just for
yeah,
that alone, it's a big deal, right? To really take this
yeah,
seriously.
absolutely.
So in closing, and you might have already answered this, but I'll say it, is if you were advising a CEO tomorrow, a utility CEO tomorrow, what bold action would you tell them to take right now that, to show that they're serious about equity?
Create a customer working group or a community working group, whatever you want to call it. I mean, that's a huge cultural step. And utilities, having worked with one, I can tell you they don't like the idea of someone else that's not a utility or not an engineer getting their nose too far into their business.
Yes, that's so
Um,
hard. And I'm going to add to that because I've seen some do that, but then it's like the usual suspects I hear that they bring in. I would say to push it even further, like open it up, right?
yeah,
For diverse voices, not just a couple that are going to agree with you on everything, but really some diverse voices so that we have people in the room. Okay. It could,
absolutely,
those
absolutely.
negotiations, what I hear is that the pushback is, oh, we don't have enough time because we're in an energy transition and we need to decarbonize tomorrow. But you know what? With all these delays, citing problems, all of this, because you're not talking to your customers, right, would actually reduce that and make it better,
Mhm.
right? So,
Absolutely,
yeah, I'd love,
absolutely. It sure could. It
yeah,
sure could. And the idea is, I think I alluded to this earlier, but for basically 5 decades, the U.S. business community and all businesses, not just utilities, but oil refinings and retailers and so on, have followed the recommendation of Nobel Prize winning economist um, Milton Friedman, who said the only social obligation a profit seeking business has is to make money for the people who own it. And that was like Bible for 50 years. And
yeah,
over the last 10 years, business community, including the Business Roundtable, has started to say, you know what, we need to think about a broader group of stakeholders because it really does come down to social license to operate. And,
yeah,
although that's a term often invoked more overseas, like when people will rise up and close down a mine because they don't like the way the mine is polluting the community or ruining the rivers or the air or the water. Um, Social license to operate is real.
yeah.
And if you want to play that game, I think there are people who are feeling their backs are against the wall, and that's a dangerous place to put anyone. They're
Mm,
back against the wall because then they have nothing to lose.
yeah.
And they can swing for the fences, and who knows what court it ends up on in front of. But I can
So
tell
get the
you,
working group,
it's
the customer working group is what I'm hearing you say, which can
there. You
solve
go.
a lot of problems along the way. I love
Exactly.
that. That's
Exactly.
great, great bold action. John, thank you for coming on today, right? It was so fun to talk with you from a communication standpoint, and also, you have a breadth of knowledge on from all your years. How could people get in touch with you or follow you?
Oh, sure. Thank you. And delight, Caroline. Delight to be here, Carolyn. My website is eganenergy.com, and my name is spelled EGAN, so not like the city in Minnesota, but EGAN, energy.com. My phone number, if you wish to text or call, is 720 949 4906. And I do have a monthly blog on utility communications, and it's free, and it's not even behind a firewall. So you can sign up if you want to receive it every month. And every month, it's whether it's internal communications or external or advertising or marketing, it's only about utility communications and marketing. So you won't find anything about, bottled water or consumer products on there. And we don't sell anyone's name to anyone else. We don't rent the list. So it's an important connection that we have with our customers and our stakeholders. And I invite everyone to join the party.
All right. We'll have all of that in our show notes as well for you. And you've heard it from so many of our guests, including John, that people like you and me are not just bystanders in our energy transition. We're co-creating it. This podcast is about co-creating it. So your voice and your participation is so essential to change the way we've done it for so long. One way you can do it is to subscribe. So if you haven't already done that, please do. It would mean so much to us, because we can keep on doing what we're doing, having more guests as great as John on, having these conversations that can lead to real change in this crucial matter of energy affordability and equity. Because equity means everyone, right? And you know this, we're all in this together. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to Just Power wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really loved it, leave us a review and tell everyone you know about our podcast. It's going to take all of us to create a clean energy future that leaves no one behind.